Hey, what's up everybody, Commander Radix here bringing you another video, and today I wanted to ask you guys the question, what does it mean to be an American? Today, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm able to release this video when I want to release it and I'm not too slow, and I don't have much time so I need to make this video quickly, this should be releasing on Thanksgiving Day, the day we commemorate the sort of Thanksgiving feast that was held by the Puritans in the colony in Plymouth, along with the Wampanoag tribe up in Plymouth. That happened in about 1621. I've made a video related to that. You can find it here. Actually, no, I can't link. It's this video on Plymouth. Look up Commander Radix Plymouth and you'll find it. But ladies and gentlemen, today I wanted to talk a little bit about how it's kind of weird that Thanksgiving is a national holiday in the United States. Because if you really think about it, it kind of has nothing to do with most of the country, or at least half of the country. But in order to talk about that, we need to talk about sort of American identity, and historically, different ways of constructing American identity. In American history, there have been several different efforts to try to understand what an American is. And a lot of this has to do with the nature of the American Revolution or the American War for Independence. A lot of America's identity crisis stems from that revolution. You know, the revolution kind of created a dilemma where the Americans suddenly found themselves an independent state, the United States of America, over on the North American continent, far away from any European, except like the French and the Spanish and Canadians, but whatever. They weren't really big in population anyway back then. But here the Americans were across the sea, sitting by their lonesome, and they kind of had to figure out, what are we? What's going on here? Now, if you want to understand what I think an American is, there's a few things you can look at. For example, I have my Substack series, the Metaphysics of Nations. You can find that on my Substack. It's a several-part series I did on Substack. You are welcome to read that. That's kind of really important for understanding my sort of political philosophy and cultural philosophy. But I also strongly recommend that you read Albion's Seed, 4 British Folkways in America by David Hackett Fischer. I think this is like the second or third time I have recommended this book, but this book really is fundamental in understanding American history and understanding who the Americans are at the base level. But this episode of History and Lore isn't really going to be about what the Americans actually are. This is going to be about 3 different constructions of American identity that were made throughout American history, one of which ties in to Thanksgiving Day. The first construction of American identity I want to bring up to you today is this construction that was created not long after the American War for Independence. 1783, freshly, independence has been achieved, and the Americans had to figure out who they are. We still have schools going on, we still have history to teach, and where do you start American history? Historically, if you were studying in America and studying in a history class as a student, your history book would start with the English people. It would start going through English history. You would learn about things like the 100 Years' War, and the Crusades, and the War of the Roses, the English Civil War, depending on when you were in time. And then eventually you'll get to the colonization of the Americas, but there's a strong continuity stressed between the Americans in the colonies and their English ancestors. But after you fight a several-year-long, fierce, contentious war with the British Empire, you're not going to be willing to highlight that continuity with the English people. After all, you declared independence from them, you've created a separate state, you've rebelled against the king, you've established your own country, and you fought a war with the British. So now, you don't really want to see yourselves as British. There was an effort by the colonials by the Americans not long after the American War of Independence to start American history with 1492. That is the discovery of the Americas by Christopher Columbus, an Italian who was discovering the Americas on the behalf of Spain. This is really interesting because Columbus honestly has very, very little to do with the American people. Yes, he did discover the Americas and established contact that would result in a large colonization of the Americas, of which the English were kind of late to the party, especially if you compare it to Spain and Portugal. There's also the factor here that Spain was the traditional enemy of the British, and that included the Americans during the colonial period. Spain was always seen as a threat. There wasn't really an effort to connect the American identity to Columbus and later Spanish explorers like De Soto, for example. You know, that's just sort of a weird place to start American history. However, the Americans, not long after the American Revolution, are trying to reestablish their identity and trying to say, yeah, we're European people on the continent of America, but we're not like British or anything. So let's start the story at Columbus and go on with the sort of Spanish explorers, and then like eventually Plymouth, Jamestown, there here, and boom, you got your Americans. Now, this narrative of American identity also kind of got revived. It kind of fell out of favor for a while just because it's a big stretch to try to connect the American people to Columbus. But it did get revived a little bit later into the late 19th, early 20th centuries, mostly through Italian immigration. A lot of Italian Americans and Italian migrants really wanted to bring up that sort of Columbus aspect to American history. Partly through Italian nationalist ideas. But then there's also going to be a kickback against that because of some anti-Italian prejudice that existed in the American nation. But though I will also predict that we might see a revival in the Columbus narrative if the United States at its current rate continues a process of sort of Latinization of a lot of migrants from Latin America, a lot of an influx of Latin American cultural ideas in the American culture. If we see that trend continue, we could see the America as Columbia narrative pop up again, maybe. But the problem of this construction of the American nation as being from the Columbus Spanish explorer wave, it erases the distinct English character of the colonies before the Revolution, and that's why I don't really agree with this construction of the American nation and the history of the American nation. That brings me to my second construction of the American nation, and that is what I like to call America as Plymouth. Now, the America as Plymouth construction of the American nation is what we see with Thanksgiving being made a national holiday across the United States. It's this idea of America being founded at Plymouth, that it's going to be New England, the New York area, that's going to become the sort of imperial core of America, and from there, that's where American ideas, American culture, the American nation spreads. Now, I am a Southerner. I have a big problem with this construction. To understand the America as Plymouth theory, we have to understand the mindset of the Yankees. And I don't mean to use that word derogatorily. I know it's sort of become a sort of slur, but Yankee was a word used by the Yankees to describe themselves historically. That's why I'm using the term. But we have to understand the Yankee view of American history is that they are the Americans, right? It's this idea of, yeah, Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill, a lot of the founding fathers, John Adams, right? A lot of the American Revolution was frankly a Yankee idea. And while, yes, there were Southern contributions to the Revolution, the Yankees still sort of held a lot of the agency in the Revolution. Plymouth was the beginning of the first large wave of English to the Americas. Jamestown was created first, but Jamestown also took a lot of time to grow. But the Yankees sort of built this idea of what it means to be American is basically the same ideals and values of what it means to be a Yankee. This sort of idea begins to be popularized around the time of just before the Civil War, into the Civil War, and after the Civil War, once the Yankees are victorious and are able to spread their ideas more without really any hindrance from the southern states. My problem with this construction of American identity and American history is that it erases the distinctness of the Southerners, and instead of recognizing the United States as a coalition of Southerners and Yankees, it turns Southerners into sort of like aberrant Americans, weird Americans. Americans who are weird, who don't really get the memo of what it means to be American. And again, this goes into why I think it's very important to read Albion Seed. I also think it's very important to sort of understand the Southern mindset a bit more, The Southern Tradition at Bay, A History of Postbellum Thought by Richard Weaver. Those are both fundamental books to understand the American nation. There's this sort of understanding that comes out of the America as Plymouth idea, and that's Americans are really one nation. I would argue if you look at American history, that's not what we see. We see the American nation, well really we see that there is no American nation. The United States of America didn't really operate as a state, to use political science terms, in so much as it acted more like an alliance, more like an agreement. The Constitution of the United States doesn't really operate as a document for governments at its foundational level. It operates as a rules of engagement. It operates as a treaty between two different nations in order to keep a balance. These two nations, ultimately the Yankees and the Southerners, find that they get more stuff done more securely if they work together. But in order for them to work together, they need to have some ground rules to agree upon. And that really is what the Constitution is. The United States of America really was a coalition of states. At this point in time, when it was created, people identified more with their states, more than with an idea of an American nation. And eventually the Civil War is sort of going to coalesce these state identities into more regional identities, although when we say regional identities, really, I'm talking about national identities. And there is a sort of erasure of Southern identity after the Civil War, when historical narratives are dominated by Yankees, to sort of push the America as Plymouth idea. Now, does this mean that I don't like Thanksgiving? That's not what it means. I love Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is epic. Thanksgiving is base. Thanksgiving is red-pilled. But I'm just saying that the America as Plymouth story doesn't hold water. The fact of the matter is that the Southern people are a distinct people. Albion Seed sort of gets into the detail of it. Their folkways are very unique. Their mindset is very different because of their past. The Southern Tradition at Bay gets into that. On the genetic level, foundational American Southerners and foundation American Yankees cluster apart, right? They are coming from different places in England, and they are clustering with each other. They show up as different genetic groups, and that's worth understanding. But that also brings us to the last construction of American identity that I want to talk about today, and that is America as proposition. Now, America as proposition, you start to see the seeds of this idea as early as the American Revolution, in the Declaration of Independence, when Thomas Jefferson writes that all men are created equal. That sort of evolves into the Gettysburg Address, in which Abraham Lincoln talks about all men being created equal, and basically, ultimately, America being a sort of idea. That because all men were created equal, America as a nation has a mandate to ignore all differences and to accept all people, and ultimately being American is more like an ideology than it actually is a people. Part of this is growing from the sort of Quaker mindset of the people who settled the middle colonies, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, who really stressed the importance of understanding that all men were created in the image of God. And so the Quakers were very much not really discriminatory in how they accepted people into their colonies. They put out the call far and wide for people to come to the colonies. and that kind of ended up with the Quakers kind of disappearing as the English Quakers as disappearing as an ethnic group. But you have their ideas sort of proliferate throughout the American consciousness that this land, this place, these people living here are open to everyone no matter what. And this sort of cascades into the civil rights movement and ideas from there. I think of all the different social constructions of what it means to be an American, of American identity, America as a proposition is kind of one of the most dangerous constructions. America as Columbia erases the foundational American nation's English characteristics and its English continuity. America as Plymouth erases the distinctiveness between the American Yankee and the American Southerner. America as proposition erases the concept of the Americans as a people, which is empirically falsifiable just by looking at the colonial era. It erases the distinctiveness of the American people or peoples as a people at all, and makes America this sort of strange land where rules everywhere else just do not apply. Everywhere else in world history, there have been a people. This land has this people, and this is what they do. They speak this language, they celebrate these holidays, they have this religion, and this is how their social structure is built up. These are the Folkways that David Hackett Fischer gets into Albion Seed. And it's very clear that the American people, or peoples, again, I'm sort of arguing that by the time we're out of the Civil War, we have a Yankee group and we have a Southerner group, that they have distinct cultures, they're a distinct people. Look at this book. This is all about the American people, and it's I could knock out a baby on the street with this. It sort of presents the idea that when you come to America, there is nothing to assimilate into. There's just nothing there, so you don't need to assimilate to anything. It's just an idea, and if you intellectually assent to these propositions and these values, you are an American. That's all you need to do, buddy. Which prevents assimilation. Everyone else has their own culture and their own folkways and their own traditions, and if they think they have nothing to assimilate to over here, they're just going to bring them over to America. And that's just going to be very harmful to the idea of a cohesive society. In most societies, there needs to be some sort of lingua franca culture, so to speak. An expected way of behavior, an expected set of beliefs, which kind of ties into the proposition, but we're not talking about beliefs as in an intellectual proposition here, but as in beliefs that come from lived-in folkways. But yeah, for this video, I just wanted to push back a little bit. I wanted to introduce and push back on 3 different constructions of American identity. In the future, I'm planning on hopefully making a video where I sort of explain who the Americans are as a people, or as peoples. That was sort of the main idea of a lot of my Commander Radix American History videos, but I want to do it more explicitly on this channel, but I hope you can look forward to that. Let me know what you thought about this video in the comments below. Again, highly recommend you check out Albion Seed. I highly recommend you check out my Substack posts on the metaphysics of nations to sort of see where I'm coming from. But that's going to wrap up this video for today. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Follow me on social media. All the links are in the description, especially X is where I'm mostly active, although I also have a Discord server, the Substack, Instagram. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.
Take your pills and keep on breathing.